The Great Hall on Nexus Prime had seen many historic moments, but today felt different. Representatives from 43 civilizations sat in their assigned sections, each species keeping to their own kind. The air recyclers worked overtime to handle the different atmospheric requirements, creating small pockets of breathable space for each delegation. Chun Martinez walked slowly toward the speaking platform at the center of the vast chamber. His black uniform looked plain compared to the glowing robes of the Altarians or the crystal armor of the Veltar. Behind him, 3 other humans followed, their faces calm but their eyes alert. They had requested this emergency session 3 days ago, and the Galaxy Council had finally agreed to hear them. The holographic display above the platform showed a map of the outer rim. Red zones marked where star systems used to be. 12 systems had vanished in the past 6 months, consumed by something the galaxy was calling the Void Swarm. No one knew exactly what it was, but everyone knew it was coming toward the core worlds. Chun reached the platform and looked up at the assembled representatives. The Altarians sat in the highest section, their tall, thin bodies radiating the confidence of a species that had ruled space for over 2,000 years. The Veltar crystals pulsed with soft blue light, their collective consciousness making decisions faster than any single mind could follow. Near the middle sat the Centauri Coalition, humanity's closest allies among the stars. Honored representatives, Chun began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. Earth and her colonies wish to make a formal request regarding the Void Swarm crisis. A ripple of interest went through the chamber. Humans were still considered newcomers to galactic society. 400 years of space travel made them infants compared to species that had been among the stars for millennia. We have studied the combat reports from the Outer Rim, Chun continued. We have analyzed the enemy's tactics and capabilities. We have run countless simulations using our war computers. He paused, looking directly at the Altarian section. We believe we can stop this threat, but we need permission to act. High Commander Zek Hall of the Altarian Navy leaned forward. His voice carried the weight of 20 centuries of military tradition. Terrans are brave, we acknowledge this. But bravery alone cannot defeat an enemy that consumes entire star systems. Chun nodded respectfully. We are not speaking of bravery, High Commander. We are speaking of capability. For the past 4 centuries, humanity has operated under the humanitarian accords. These agreements limit our military responses to defensive actions only. We have respected these limits because we value peace above all else. The crystals of the Veltar delegation began pulsing faster, their shared thoughts racing through quantum connections. Their spokesman, a tall crystal formation that sparkled like a living diamond, spoke in harmonious tones. The humanitarian accords exist for good reason. Terran Chun, your species has a documented history of violence against your own kind. These limitations protect the galaxy from unfortunate incidents. Several representatives nodded in agreement. The humans' bloody history was well known throughout the galaxy. World wars, nuclear weapons, genocides, all of this had happened before humans ever left their home planet. The humanitarian accords had been created specifically to prevent humanity from bringing such violence to the stars. Chun's expression remained calm, but something flickered in his eyes. We understand your concerns. Our history speaks for itself, and we do not ask you to forget it. But this enemy is different. The Void Swarm does not negotiate. It does not trade. It does not seek territory or resources. It simply consumes everything in its path. He activated his personal display, showing footage from the Battle of Kepler Station. The assembled representatives watched as dark shapes that seemed to bend light around them tore through the station's shields like paper. The defending fleet, made up of ships from 6 different species, fought bravely but uselessly against an enemy that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. 12 systems have fallen, Chun said quietly. Billions of lives lost. The Altarian Third Fleet was destroyed at Proxima Tertius. The Veltar crystal gardens of New Harmony have been twisted into something unrecognizable. Your most advanced weapons barely scratch these creatures. High Commander Ezekiel stood, his 7-foot frame imposing even among the diverse assembly. Human ships use primitive fusion drives. Human weapons fire simple kinetic projectiles and basic energy beams. What can your forces accomplish that our antimatter fleets cannot? Chun looked at his fellow humans for a moment. They nodded almost imperceptibly. High Commander, we have been in space for 4 centuries. In that time, we have never once shown you our full capabilities. The ships you see, the weapons we carry, the tactics we use, all of this has been carefully limited by the humanitarian accords. The chamber grew quiet. Even the constant hum of the air recyclers seemed to fade. What exactly are you requesting? Asked Minister Velyuna of the Centauri Coalition. Her 4 arms gestured gracefully as she spoke, a sign of deep concern among her people. We request permission to suspend the humanitarian accords for the duration of this crisis, Chun said. Allow us to deploy our full military doctrine. Let us show you what Terra has been holding in reserve. The reaction was immediate. The Altarians made harsh clicking sounds that their translators rendered as laughter. The Veltar crystals pulsed angry red light. Even the normally diplomatic Centauri looked skeptical. Terran Chun, High Commander Zekhal said, his voice filled with condescension. Your enthusiasm is appreciated. But this crisis requires proven military might, not untested theories. The Veltar spokesman chimed in, their harmonious voice carrying a note of gentle correction. The mathematics are clear, Terran. Even if your hidden capabilities exceed your current fleet by a factor of 10, it would not be sufficient. This enemy has destroyed forces that would crush your entire civilization. Chun remained standing at the platform, his face showing no emotion. We understand your position, but we felt obligated to make this offer. When this crisis is over, we want history to record that Terra tried to help in the only way it could. The vote was called quickly. 43 civilizations voted on humanity's request. Only 3 voted in favor, Earth herself. The Centauri Coalition out of loyalty, and surprisingly, the merchant species known as the Traders Union, who had always appreciated humanity's reliability in business dealings. 40 votes against. The motion was denied. Chun gathered his materials slowly, his movements careful and precise. Thank you for considering our request, he said formally. Terra will continue to provide support within the limits of the humanitarian accords. We will evacuate civilians, provide medical aid, and defend ourselves when attacked. Nothing more. As the human delegation left the chamber, High Commander Zekhal turned to his aide. Increase patrols along our border with human space. If the swarm continues its advance, we may need to evacuate through their territory. At least their fusion drives will be adequate for refugee transport. The aide nodded, already composing the orders. Neither of them noticed the small smile that crossed Chen's face as he walked through the exit, nor the way the other humans moved with the precise coordination of a military unit despite their civilian clothes. Above the chamber, the holographic display continued showing the red zones where star systems used to exist. The Void Swarm was still coming, and the galaxy's greatest military powers prepared to meet it with conventional tactics and traditional strategies. Terra had offered to help. They had given fair warning. The galaxy had chosen to decline that help. Now they would all live with the consequences of that choice. 3 months had passed since the Galaxy Council rejected humanity's offer, and the situation had grown much worse. Commander Thekros of the Altarian Navy stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his homeworld die through the main viewing screen. Altair Prime had been the jewel of the galaxy for 2,000 years. Floating cities that touched the clouds, crystalline spires that reached toward the stars, gardens that had been tended by 100 generations. Now dark shapes moved through the sky like living shadows, and everything they touched simply stopped existing. "Sir, the evacuation fleets are requesting permission to retreat," his communications officer reported. Her voice carried the strain of someone who had not slept in days. Thekros watched another of his destroyers vanish into the hungry darkness. The ship's antimatter reactor had provided enough power to level a mountain, but against these creatures, it might as well have been a candle in a hurricane. "Granted," he said quietly. "All ships begin immediate retreat. Mark Altair Prime as lost." On the far side of the galaxy, the Veltar faced their own nightmare. Their crystal gardens on New Harmony had taken 10,000 years to grow. Each crystal formation represented centuries of careful cultivation, guided growth, and artistic vision. The gardens were more than beautiful. They were living libraries, storing the memories and knowledge of their entire civilization. The Void Swarm had found them 3 days ago. Velshatan, the eldest of the garden keepers, stood among the twisted remains of her life's work. The crystals still grew, but they had become something wrong. Where once they had pulsed with gentle blue light, now they radiated a darkness that hurt to look at. The stored memories had become screams. "The evacuation ships are ready," her assistant reported, their harmonic voice cracking with grief. "The last of the knowledge crystals have been loaded." Velshatan nodded slowly. "Begin the demolition sequence. If we cannot save the gardens, at least we can prevent them from being used against others. The charges they set would crack the planet's core. Better to destroy 10,000 years of work than let it become a weapon for the enemy." But while the galaxy's greatest civilizations watched their worlds burn, humanity remained strangely busy. Human ships appeared at every disaster zone, always arriving first, despite their supposedly slow fusion drives. Their small vessels worked around the clock, pulling survivors from burning stations and collapsing habitats. Captain Maria Santos of the civilian transport ship Peaceful Trader guided another group of refugees toward her cargo base. 200 Veltar children, their crystal bodies dim with shock and fear. Her crew moved with practiced efficiency, arranging sleeping areas and setting up the life support systems needed for crystalline biology. "Captain," her first officer said quietly, "that's the 7th refugee group this week. The ship is rated for a crew of 30, but we're carrying almost 2,000 beings now." Maria nodded, checking her calculations one more time. On paper, it should be impossible. Her ship was too small, her life support systems too limited, her cargo space inadequate. But somehow, they made it work. Every human transport seemed to have the same miraculous ability to carry far more than their listed capacity. "We'll manage, Tom. We always do." What the aliens didn't see were the hidden modifications. The cargo containers that were actually sophisticated life support modules. The fuel tanks that could be rapidly converted into living spaces. The maintenance compartments that held emergency medical equipment decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen. Every human ship had these modifications. Every human crew knew how to use them. And every human transport could become a refugee ark when needed. On Earth, activity buzzed in places that didn't exist on any official map. Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, Admiral Elena Vasquez walked through corridors carved from solid rock. The facility around her had been built centuries ago, during humanity's first expansion into space. Officially, it was a geological research station. In reality, it was one of dozens of hidden command centers scattered throughout human space. "Ma'am, The Outer Rim monitoring stations are reporting increased swarm activity, her aide reported. They've consumed 27 systems now. The pattern suggests they're heading for the core worlds. Elena studied the tactical display, her mind processing information that would have overwhelmed most military computers. What's the status of our evacuation operations? Proceeding ahead of schedule. Our transport fleets have relocated over 3 million refugees so far. The aliens still believe we're just being helpful neighbors. Elena allowed herself a small smile. The galaxy saw human merchant ships and civilian transports. They didn't see the hidden weapon systems, the concealed sensor arrays, or the fact that every civilian crew member had graduated from one of the most advanced military academies in known space. Meanwhile, on the moon, Chief Engineer David Kim supervised the expansion of what everyone thought were civilian shipyards. The facilities supposedly built simple freight haulers and passenger liners. But beneath the visible construction base lay something much larger. How's the timeline looking? He asked his second-in-command. Right on schedule. The first squadron should be ready for deployment within 6 weeks. The second squadron 2 weeks after that. David nodded, watching robotic arms assemble components that no alien scientist could identify. The ships taking shape in the hidden bays looked nothing like the simple fusion-powered vessels the galaxy knew about. These were something else entirely. On Mars, the underground cities revealed their true nature. What appeared to be farming communities and research stations were actually vast manufacturing complexes. Millions of humans lived and worked in facilities that burrowed deep into the planet's core, producing equipment and weapons that would have made the galaxy's greatest. Military powers stepped back in shock. Dr. Sarah Chen supervised one of the biochemical laboratories, her team working on countermeasures against the Void Swarm's unique properties. Any progress on the dimensional displacement theory? Her colleague looked up from his calculations. We're getting somewhere. The swarm exists partially outside normal spacetime, but that also makes them vulnerable to specific types of interference. If we can generate the right frequency modulation. Sarah nodded. Around them, other teams worked on projects that pushed the boundaries of physics itself. Weapons that could strike across dimensional barriers. Shields that could exist in multiple realities simultaneously. Sensors that could track enemies through folded space. The galaxy thought humans were primitive because they used fusion drives and kinetic weapons. They didn't understand that those were just the tools humans allowed them to see. In the asteroid belt, mining stations continued their work with mechanical precision. Automated systems stripped valuable metals from floating rocks, feeding the raw materials to processing plants that ran day and night. But the aliens who occasionally visited these facilities never looked closely at what was being built. The mining equipment could reconfigure itself in minutes. The storage containers were actually weapons platforms waiting for activation codes. The communication arrays were sensor networks that monitored every ship, movement in human space. As the Void Swarm continued its advance, consuming world after world, the galaxy's military leaders grew increasingly desperate. Their most advanced weapons barely slowed the enemy down. Their fastest ships couldn't outrun creatures that moved through folded space. Their best strategies crumbled against an enemy that seemed to operate outside the normal rules of warfare. But in the hidden places of human space, final preparations were being made. Weapons were being loaded, ships were being fueled, and soldiers were receiving their final briefings. The galaxy had rejected humanity's offer of help 3 months ago. Soon, they would discover what that help would have looked like. The Void Swarm was still coming, and conventional resistance had failed at every turn. The galaxy's greatest civilizations watched their worlds burn and wondered if anything could stop the advancing darkness. They were about to find out what 4 centuries of hidden preparation could accomplish. They were about to learn what humanity had been holding back. But first, they would have to ask for help. Captain Sarah Okafor stood on the bridge of the UHSS Defiant, watching the impossible unfold before her eyes. New Geneva Station had been humanity's pride in this sector, a massive civilian facility that housed 3 million beings from dozens of species. Now it was dying. The Void Swarm had found it 6 hours ago. The station's shields, powered by the best technology the galaxy could provide, had held for exactly 17 minutes. After that, the dark shapes began their work of consumption. Whatever they touched simply stopped existing, leaving twisted gaps in reality itself. "Captain, we're receiving the final evacuation signal from New Geneva," her communications officer reported. Lieutenant Park's voice was steady, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. "The last transport ships are requesting immediate escort to the jump point." Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. 17 transport vessels carrying the last survivors from the station. Behind them, writhing darkness consumed everything else. The rescue ships were of mixed origin: Altarian fast cruisers, Veltar crystal ships, and 3 human transports bringing up the rear. "All ships, this is Defiant Control," Sarah broadcast. "Maintain formation and proceed to jump coordinates. We'll provide rear guard protection." It was a lie, and everyone knew it. The Defiant was a simple human transport ship with basic shields and minimal weapons. Against the Void Swarm, they might buy the refugees 5 minutes of extra time. Maybe 10 if they were lucky. One of the escape ships, an Altarian cruiser carrying mostly children, fell behind the others. Sarah watched on the display as its engines flickered and failed. The ship was still moving, but not fast enough to reach the jump point before the swarm caught up. "Captain," her tactical officer called out. "The Altarian ship Swift Current is reporting engine failure. They're asking for assistance." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. According to the humanitarian accords, she was authorized to provide escort protection and emergency rescue only. She could not engage in offensive operations against an enemy force. She could not use weapon systems beyond basic defensive capability. She could not reveal any military technology that might upset the galactic balance of power. But on her display, she could see 300 Altarian children about to die. Children who had done nothing wrong except be in the wrong place when the darkness came. "Communications. Open a quantum encrypted channel to Terra Command," she ordered quietly. Her communications officer hesitated. "Ma'am, that's a military-grade encryption channel. Protocol requires civilian captains to use standard commercial frequencies." Sarah looked at him calmly. "Lieutenant Park, do you see any commercial shipping authorities out here today?" Park activated the channel. The response came immediately, in a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. "This is Terra Command. State your authorization." Sarah took a deep breath. Once she said the words, there would be no going back. The careful deception that humanity had maintained for 4 centuries would begin to crumble. "Control, this is Defiant Actual. I'm invoking Protocol 7. A pause. Then, Captain Okafor, confirm your authorization code. Sierra Hotel Alpha Delta Echo Sierra." She paused, then added the phrase that would change everything. "The shadows have grown too long. Authorization confirmed. Protocol 7 is now active for your vessel. Captain, you are no longer operating under humanitarian accord restrictions. Welcome back to the war." The moment the transmission ended, the Defiant began to transform. The outer hull plates that had always appeared to be simple metallic protection began retracting into hidden compartments. Beneath them, surfaces that seemed to absorb light itself were revealed. The ship's fusion reactor signature, which had been broadcasting steadily for years, suddenly spiked to levels that should have been impossible for its size. On the bridge, new control stations rose from the floor. Displays that had never existed before came online, showing information about weapon systems and defensive capabilities that no alien scientist had ever suspected. Tactical. Weapons status, Sarah ordered, her tactical officer, who had been Lieutenant Chun for the past 3 years, now revealed training that went far beyond civilian navigation. Primary systems online. Dimensional displacement cannons charging to full power. Reality anchors deploying. Temporal shields at maximum. Sarah nodded, her hands moving over controls that had been hidden beneath false panels. Target the swarm cluster pursuing the refugee ships. Full spread, maximum yield. The Defiant didn't just open fire. It unleashed something that redefined the concept of warfare itself. Beams of energy that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously struck the void swarm creatures. The dark shapes that had been immune to antimatter explosions and gravitational weapons suddenly began to collapse in on themselves. Their ability to exist partially outside normal space became a liability as the human weapons followed them through dimensional barriers. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The swarm cluster that had been pursuing the refugees simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not scattered, but actually removed from reality across multiple dimensional planes. On board the escaping ships, alien crews stared at their sensors in disbelief. The Altarian captain of the Swift Current opened an emergency channel. Human vessel Defiant, what was that weapon? Our sensors cannot identify the energy signature. Sarah looked at her tactical display, where dozens more swarm clusters were converging on their position. Captain Philwan, I suggest you get your people to the jump point as quickly as possible. Things are about to get interesting. The swarm had noticed them now. The creatures that had been slowly consuming New Geneva Station turned their attention to this new threat. But instead of the easy prey they expected, they found something that fought back with weapons they couldn't understand. The Defiant moved through space in ways that violated basic physics. Its engines didn't just provide thrust, they manipulated space-time itself, allowing the ship to be in multiple positions simultaneously. When the swarm tried to surround them, they discovered they were attacking empty space while the real ship struck from an impossible angle. Sarah watched the tactical display with calm professionalism. How? Bring us about. Target the main swarm mass around the station. Ma'am, there are over 3,000 individual entities in that cluster. Our previous engagement was against maybe 50 targets. Sarah smiled, and for the first time, the expression looked genuinely dangerous. Lieutenant, that was a test firing. Now let's show them what this ship was actually built for. The Defiant's true nature revealed itself fully. What had appeared to be a simple civilian transport was actually a weapons platform that incorporated technology, decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen. The ship didn't just carry advanced weapons, it was designed around principles that most alien scientists would have dismissed as impossible as the battle unfolded. Escape ships from dozens of species watched in stunned silence. The human vessel danced through the swarm like a predator among prey, its weapons carving paths of destruction through enemy formations that had destroyed entire fleets. On the Veltar crystal ship, Harmony's Edge, the captain sent an urgent message to their homeworld. Command, we are witnessing impossible events. The human transport Defiant is engaging the Void Swarm with weapons that appear to operate outside known physics. The enemy formations are being systematically destroyed. Request immediate analysis of human military capabilities. The response came back within minutes. Impossible. Human technology is centuries behind our own. Confirm your sensor readings. Sensors confirmed and triple-checked. Command, we may have seriously misjudged the Terrans. Sarah looked at the aftermath of the engagement. New Geneva Station was still lost, but the swarm cluster that had taken it was gone. The refugees had reached the jump point safely. Her ship had revealed capabilities that would terrify the galaxy if they truly understood what they meant. Communications. Send a message to the refugee convoy, she ordered. Inform them that the immediate threat has been neutralized. They should proceed to designated safe zones. She paused, then added, and send a copy of this engagement to Terra Command. I think it's time for some more serious conversations. The secrets that humanity had kept for 4 centuries were beginning to surface. The galaxy was about to learn what Terra meant when they said they had been holding back. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood in the war room deep beneath the Swiss Alps, surrounded by displays that showed the true scope of human space. For 400 years, this facility had remained hidden from the galaxy's surveillance networks. Today, its secrets would finally see the light of battle. Ma'am, Captain Okafor's engagement at New Geneva has been successful, her aide reported. The swarm cluster has been eliminated with 0 casualties to our forces. Elena nodded, studying the massive holographic display that dominated the chamber. The galaxy knew about Sol System, about the dozen or so official human colonies, about the trade routes that connected them. What they didn't know was that this represented perhaps 10% of humanity's actual presence in space. What's the reaction from the other species? She asked. Confusion, mostly. The Altarians are demanding an explanation for the Defiance weapons capabilities. The Veltar have requested immediate technological exchanges. The Centauri Coalition is asking if we've been lying to them all these years. Elena allowed herself a small smile. In a sense, we have, but not out of malice. She activated her command console, preparing to send the orders that would change the galaxy forever. Signal all commands. Implement Protocol 7 across all sectors. Full deployment all assets. The orders went out across quantum encrypted channels that the galaxy's intelligence services had never detected. On 100 worlds that officially didn't exist, military commanders received the authorization they had been waiting for since the first human ship left Earth on Kepler 442b. What the galaxy knew as an agricultural research station began to transform. The wheat fields and experimental farms that alien visitors occasionally toured were real enough, but they covered underground facilities that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Colonel James Wright watched as concealed blast doors opened across the continent-sized base. All squadrons, prepare for deployment, he broadcast to pilots who had been disguised as farmers and researchers for years. This is not a drill. Repeat, Protocol 7 is active. The grain silos split open to reveal launch bays for fighters that incorporated technology the galaxy's scientists would have declared impossible. These weren't simple fusion-powered craft. They were machines designed to fight in multiple dimensions simultaneously, capable of pursuing enemies through folded space and time. Similar scenes played out across dozens of systems. The mining operation in the Tau Ceti asteroid belt revealed itself to be a massive weapons platform. The scientific research station around Wolf 359 unfolded, like a metal flower to expose defense grids that could protect entire solar systems. But the most shocking revelation wasn't the technology, it was the people. On the agricultural world of New Texas, farmer Maria Rodriguez received her activation codes while tending to her cattle. She calmly finished feeding the animals, then walked to her barn and activated a hidden panel. Inside was military equipment that she hadn't touched in 3 years, but her hands moved over it with the precision of long training. Unit 774 reporting for duty, she said into the communicator. Local militia ready for deployment. Across the planet, similar scenes played out thousands of times. Every farmer, every shopkeeper, every civilian on the world revealed military training that went far beyond basic civil defense. They moved with the coordination of professional soldiers, because that's exactly what they were. Dr. Kevin Park looked up from his research into crop genetics as the alert came through his laboratory. Without hesitation, he began the shutdown procedures for his official work and activated systems that his alien colleagues had never suspected existed. The peaceful agricultural research facility transformed into a command center capable of coordinating military operations across multiple star systems, the pattern repeated throughout human space. Every civilian was a trained soldier. Every research station was a military base. Every merchant ship was a potential warship. The galaxy suddenly realized that they had been sharing space with a civilization that was organized like a vast military machine, hidden beneath a facade of peaceful cooperation. In the Vega system, Captain Lisa Thompson of the merchant vessel Prosperity's Dream received her new orders. Her ship had been carrying legitimate trade goods between human colonies and alien worlds for 5 years. But concealed in her cargo holds were weapon systems that could level cities. Engineering, bring the military reactor online, she ordered. Tactical, deploy the primary weapons array. Communications, signal the fleet that Prosperity Actual is ready for combat operations. Around her, the bridge transformed as hidden panels opened to reveal military-grade control stations. A crew of civilian traders moved with practiced efficiency to their real positions as highly trained naval officers. The transformation wasn't limited to people and places. Throughout human space, the very nature of their technology was being revealed. The fusion drives that everyone thought were primitive suddenly showed their true nature as power sources for systems that operated beyond conventional physics. The simple kinetic weapons that seemed so basic were actually delivery systems for ammunition that could exist in multiple dimensional states. On Luna, Chief Engineer David Kim watched as the hidden construction bays came online. The ships that emerged looked nothing like the civilian transports and cargo haulers that the galaxy associated with human engineering. These were vessels built around weapon systems that treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolute rules. First squadron deployment in 30 minutes, he announced to the assembly crews. These ships have been waiting 4 years for this moment. Don't disappoint them. The alien observers who occasionally visited the lunar facilities had seen the visible construction bays, the ones that actually did build civilian ships. They had never suspected that the moon's mass was nearly doubled by hidden facilities that burrowed deep into its core. Back in the war room on Earth, Admiral Vasquez coordinated the largest military deployment in human history. Her displays showed the true extent of humanity's presence in space. Not dozens of colonies, but hundreds. Not simple trade routes, but a network of military supply lines that could support combat operations across half the galaxy. All assets report ready for deployment, her chief of staff announced. We have over 3,000 combat vessels coming online, plus support infrastructure that includes 47 fortress worlds and 12 shipyard complexes. Elena nodded, studying the deployment map. Every red dot represented a military asset that the galaxy had never known existed. Every green zone showed a defensive position that could hold off entire fleets. Every blue line indicated a supply route that could support extended combat operations. Signal all commands, she said quietly. Humanity is no longer operating under the humanitarian accords. We are at war. The message went out to every human vessel in space, every base on every world, every soldier in every unit. For the first time in 4 centuries, humanity would fight without restraints, without limitations, without the careful controls that had kept their true nature hidden from their neighbors. On the bridge of the heavy cruiser Determination, Admiral Chun Martinez, the same man who had addressed the Galaxy Council 3 months earlier, watched his fleet assemble. 300 ships that the galaxy had never seen. carrying weapons that the galaxy didn't know were possible. Crewed by people who had been preparing for this war since the day they were born. "All ships report ready, Admiral," his flag captain announced. "The Void Swarm won't know what hit them." Chun smiled, remembering the condescending laughter from the Altarian High Commander when humanity offered to help. "Captain, the Void Swarm is just the first target. Today, the galaxy learns what Terra truly meant when we said we were holding back." Throughout human space, the masquerade was ending. The careful deception that had lasted for centuries was being swept away by necessity. Humanity was revealing its true face to the galaxy, not the peaceful traders and helpful neighbors that everyone thought they knew, but something far more dangerous that the galaxy had lived for 400 years under the protection of apex predators who chose to be gardeners instead. Now, those predators were taking off their masks, and the universe was about to remember why humanity had needed those restrictions in the first place. The Void Swarm had forced this revelation by being a threat that couldn't be stopped with conventional methods. But as humanity's true military might began to deploy across the galaxy, some observers were beginning to wonder if this is what humans unleash against an existential threat. What exactly have they been protecting the galaxy from all these years? Soon, they would find out. The edge of known space had never seen a fleet like this one. Admiral Chun Martinez stood on the bridge of the USS Retribution, watching as humanity's true navy assembled for the final assault. 3,000 ships moved in perfect formation, each one a technological marvel that the galaxy had never suspected could exist. Around them, what remained of the galaxy's conventional forces watched in stunned silence. The Altarian High Commander Zekhal, whose homeworld had been consumed just weeks earlier, could barely process what his sensors were telling him. The human fleet wasn't just larger than expected. It was operating with technology that redefined what was possible. "Admiral Chun," came the transmission from Zekhal's flagship. "My sensors must be malfunctioning. They show your vessels existing in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously." Chun activated his response channel, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. "Your sensors are functioning perfectly, High Commander. Today you see humanity without the mask we've worn for 4 centuries. The target of their assembled might lay ahead, a massive rift in space-time itself where the Void Swarm had first entered the galaxy. The tier in reality stretched for thousands of kilometers, pulsing with energies that seemed to exist outside the normal laws of physics. Through it, more swarm entities continued to pour into their dimension, adding to the forces that had already consumed 37 star systems. The conventional approach would have been to establish a defensive perimeter and try to hold the line. But humanity had never been interested in conventional approaches. "Fleet Command, this is Retribution Actual." Chun broadcast to his ships. "Begin Dimensional Displacement Protocol. All vessels, phase shift to combat configuration." The human fleet didn't just change formation. It changed the fundamental nature of how it existed in space. Ships began occupying multiple dimensional phases, allowing them to attack from angles that shouldn't exist while remaining immune to conventional weapons fire. The effect was like watching a solid object become a ghost. Except this ghost carried weapons that could reshape reality. Dr. Sarah Kim, the lead scientist on the operation, monitored the readings from her research vessel at the rear of the formation. "Admiral, the dimensional resonance is holding steady. We can maintain this state for approximately 6 hours before the strain becomes dangerous." 6 hours to end a war that had already destroyed dozens of civilizations. Chun found the timeline adequate. "All vessels, begin the advance. Target the rift structure directly. This ends today." The human fleet moved forward, and the Void Swarm responded with the full fury of creatures that had never known defeat. Dark shapes that bent light around them launched themselves from the rift, moving through folded space to engage the advancing humans. These were the entities that had torn apart antimatter-powered battleships like paper, that had consumed entire worlds without slowing down. They met weapons that had been designed specifically to counter their advantages. Captain Sarah Okafor, now commanding the heavy destroyer Unyielding, watched her tactical display as her vessel's dimensional displacement cannons locked onto targets. The Void Swarm's ability to exist partially outside normal space had made them immune to conventional weapons. But humanity's arsenal was anything but conventional. Fire, she ordered simply. The resulting weapons discharge existed in 17 different dimensional phases simultaneously. The swarm entities that tried to phase shift out of normal space found the attack, following them through every possible reality. Their greatest defensive advantage became their weakness as human. Weapons turned their own dimensional nature against them. Across the battle space, similar scenes played out thousands of times. Human ships fought the Void Swarm not just in normal space, but across the entire spectrum of dimensional reality. Every phase shift the enemy attempted was met by weapons fire that existed in that same phase. Every attempt to use their reality-bending abilities was countered by technology that had been specifically designed to exploit such tactics that the watching alien forces could barely comprehend what they were seeing. Ships firing weapons that existed in multiple dimensions. Defensive systems that created localized changes in the laws of physics. Sensor systems that tracked enemies through folded spacetime. "This is impossible," High Commander Zekhal transmitted to his aide. No single species could develop such technology. His aide, a young officer who had spent time studying human history, responded quietly, "Sir, perhaps we misunderstood what it meant that they came from a world where they fought constant wars against their own kind." Zekhal fell silent as the implications hit him. A species that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare against opponents as intelligent and creative as themselves. A species that had learned to prepare for every possible threat, because their own kind had been the most dangerous enemy they could imagine. The battle was not just one-sided. It was a systematic dismantling of an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. The human fleet worked with mechanical precision, each ship knowing exactly what role it played in the larger strategy. They didn't just fight the Void Swarm. They hunted it. Admiral Chun watched the tactical displays with satisfaction. Fleet status report. 87% of swarm forces in local space have been neutralized, his flag captain reported. Dimensional rift shows signs of structural instability. Dr. Kim believes we can begin the closure sequence within the hour. Chun nodded. Around him, the bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency of professionals, doing what they had trained their entire lives to do. Every human in the fleet had been preparing for this day since childhood, studying warfare not as a necessity, but as an art form to be perfected. The final phase began as human engineering ships moved close to the dimensional rift. Their task was not to destroy it. That would have sent shockwaves through space-time that could damage reality itself. Instead, they would close it, sealing the entrance so that no more swarm entities could enter their dimension. Dr. Sarah Kim coordinated the delicate operation from her research vessel, initiating dimensional frequency modulation. All ships maintain exact positions. Any deviation could destabilize local spacetime. The process took 3 hours. Human ships working in perfect coordination, their crews manipulating forces that most galactic civilizations didn't know existed. Slowly, carefully, they began to collapse the rift that had brought the Void Swarm into their reality. The swarm entities still in normal space fought desperately as they realized what was happening. But their desperation only made them easier targets for human weapons that had been designed to exploit panic and chaos. When the rift finally collapsed, the silence was absolute. The void swarm, cut off from its source dimension and systematically destroyed by human forces, simply ceased to exist. The threat that had consumed 37 star systems and defied the galaxy's greatest military powers was gone. Chun opened a channel to the assembled alien forces. "This is Admiral Chun Martinez of the Terran Defense Fleet. The Void Swarm has been eliminated. The dimensional rift has been permanently sealed. The galaxy is safe." The response came from High Commander Jack Hall, his voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Admiral Chun, the galaxy owes humanity a debt that can never be repaid. But I must ask, if these are your capabilities when facing an existential threat, what exactly have you been protecting us from all these years?" Chun looked at his tactical displays, where human ships were already beginning to power down their weapon systems and return to their peaceful configurations. The most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen was preparing to fade back into the shadows, to become merchants and farmers and researchers once again. "High Commander," he said quietly, "you've just seen what humanity unleashes when faced with an enemy that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be negotiated with, and seeks only destruction. We hope never to show you what we would deploy against an enemy that was intelligent, adaptive, and genuinely threatening to our survival." The implication hung in space like a dark star. The galaxy had just been saved by creatures that considered this overwhelming display of force to be merely their response to a simple threat. In the weeks that followed, the humanitarian accords were quietly reinstated. Human ships returned to their simple fusion drives and basic weapons. The hidden bases faded back into the shadows. The massive fleets were stored away in facilities that once again became invisible to galactic surveillance. But everyone remembered. Every alien species now knew that humanity's helpful neighbors and reliable trading partners were apex predators in disguise. Every government understood that the peaceful farmers and researchers living among them were soldiers trained from birth for warfare beyond. Imagination. Chun returned to his role as a simple ambassador, the same position he had held when he first warned the galaxy about the coming threat. But when he walked the halls of the Galaxy Council, representatives stepped aside with a respect that bordered on fear. The galaxy was safe. The Void Swarm was gone, and everyone understood that they lived under the protection of gardeners who could become gods of war whenever the shadows grew too long. In classified archives throughout human space, contingency plans remained active.